Back in 2004, we here in North America retreated to the GameCube title Custom Robo. In it, you play as a no-name hero character who's decided to get a job since his dad abandoned him, mom is never mentioned, and I guess his money has run its course. You have an interview with a local bounty hunter office, but as fate would have it, you don't have a custom robo to call your own. Instead of just turning you away, the boss man sends you to an emergency job where through dumb luck you come across and essentially steal a robo to call your own. From here, you get to the main focus of the gameplay, battling custom robos. With a huge selection of parts such as bombs, guns, and robo models, you fight in small arenas with up to 3 other robos, and last one standing wins. It's a fairly niche Nintendo title, but at least did well enough to get another game a few years later on the Nintendo DS. That game also being the first and only custom robo game released in Europe. I love this game and return often to replay it. The story has that nice blend of being stupid silly but hits you with a gut punch of seriousness and even has a pretty shocking twist in there. I even really enjoy the DS game, but imagine my surprise to find out there are actually 3 other games before it, henceforth dubbed the Unlocalised Trilogy. There are 2 games on the Nintendo 64 with Custom Robo 64 and Custom Robo V2, as well as Custom Robo GX on the Game Boy Advance. I'm going to talk about all 3 games, but more so focus on the first one, and that is due to the fact that it is the only one of the 3 to have a fully complete fan translation. I cannot read a lick of Japanese, and they're pretty wordy for 3rd generation games, so holding up Google Translate for what are likely 5 to 8 hour adventures didn't really appeal to me. So with that being said, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Opinionative Show, an internet thing where I have opinions and you're going to listen to them. These are my opinions on Custom Robo, the Unlocalised Trilogy. Did any of you play Metal Gear Acid? It opens up with an automated scene that runs you through the gameplay at a blistering rate and you get no time to actually process what's going on. Well, this game does the exact same thing. You start off dreaming of a custom robo battle. No context is given, you've just got 2 robos going at it in the arena. We end up falling out of bed and our mom comes up to tell us to get ready for the day. This character has no name and shall be referred to as Beans going forward since that's what I chose to name the save file. Beans heads downstairs where he's gifted his very first custom robo, Ray Mark I. Our buddy Shinichi comes in and excitedly explains to us that in order to use it, we must first register via iScan. Doing so locks the custom robo to Beans, making it usable only by him. I like to point out really quick that all footage from the first set of the game was recorded on Project 64, and for whatever reason, text caused a lot of issues with the recording. I didn't notice right away since it didn't affect the actual game in the slightest. I tried switching emulators and it seemed to fix it, so no clue what was causing the problem. Anyway, after our iScan registration is complete, Shinichi takes us over to the custom robo station so we can have our very first battle and get some practice in. Our first battle is purely to get a handle on the controls since he doesn't even attack, he just runs around at you. The controls are simple, but they're a bit weird. Firstly, when you begin a battle, you launch out of a cannon and must awaken your robo by wiggling the analog stick. The time it takes to get up depends on where your dice lands, and I cannot stand this mechanic. You bounce all over the place and it feels like it was weighted to land you in awful positions while your opponent gains an advantage. The goal is to get your opponent's HP to 0. It's not like a lot of these fights are super challenging, but I vastly prefer how this is handled in the GameCube game. Your main attacks are your gun, which is fired with the A button, and your bomb, which is fired using the B button. The joystick moves you around, and you can use any of the C buttons to perform a little dash attack. Doing enough damage within a short amount of time, or landing a successful dash attack, will put your opponent into a down phase where they are completely vulnerable to attacks, though it seems to actually decrease the damage taken. Once a robo gets back up, they enter a recovery period where they become invincible for a short time. This can be used to either widen or shorten the gap between the opponent depending on what you're trying to accomplish. The part that took me the longest to get used to was jumping is mapped to the R button. Why they decided to map it to R instead of A is beyond me, but I did eventually get used to it. Mostly. It did still trip me up throughout the entire game, but I never lost because of it. These battles are the bread and butter of the gameplay. As you win more battles, you'll unlock different parts. A lot of the fun comes from trying out a bunch of different parts and finding combos that not only best suit yourself, but what also works against your enemies. One major note, though, is you can't change your Custom Robo's model out during the story, which is a real shame since the race type, the Shining Fighter, is not one I'm a huge fan of. It works, but part of what I really liked about Custom Robo on the GameCube was selecting between different models since they actually change how your Robo functions instead of just changing your weapons out. What can be changed, though, has plenty to offer. You've got your gun, which is probably what you'll use 90% of the time. This can be anything from a basic shooter, a rapid-fire Gatling gun, flamethrower, and many others that offer a variety of shot types, distances, and strengths. You've also got bombs and pods which do damage your opponent, but aren't really meant to be used offensively. They're supposed to be used to manipulate your opponent by forcing them to move in certain ways to avoid their blasts. I usually just scatter pods everywhere and fire off bombs when I remember I even have it. The last part you can change are the legs, and I don't change these much at all. The legs adjust things such as jump height, speed, momentum, etc., but since I can't change my actual Robo, I mostly use ones that just make me better on the ground. After you get done fighting Shinichi for real, you head on over to the park where we're introduced to the third member of our trio, Karen. Karen is currently battling fellow residents in the park, implying she's at least a decent commander. Naturally, you crush her, and after winning your third battle ever, Karen suggests you enter a local tournament. That's quite a leap, and it's here where I learned that this game's story pace takes off like a bullet train. On the next day, we have a few battles, and I meet Licht, who's a total egomaniac and absolutely needs to be put in his place. We win, and he leaves somehow with his nose still in the air. The next day is some more training, and just 3 days after we got our first Robo, we are now entering a tournament. A tournament is a simple bracket-based tournament. We start by fighting the most obnoxious character in the game, Fukashi. Fukashi is your self-proclaimed rival who always makes a grand entrance, and you can just tell this would be the kid who doesn't have any sort of self-awareness or volume control. We also fight Hayao, another kid who just got started with Custom Robo and seems to have issues with the world, but we find out later he just has issues socializing, but on the complete opposite end of Fukashi. After that, we beat Licht, who runs home crying, and win the tournament against our final opponent, Karen. Winning the tournament gives us the privilege to enter both sides of the upcoming Super Commander tournament, where if we win both, we get to participate in an exhibition match against the reigning World Cup champion, Mamoru. But before that, we need to fend off Fukashi and his gang of bullies who are hogging the battle deck in the park. This guy just sucks. After beating him, you end up taking a detour to an exclusive garden party hosted at Kataya's house. Katalia is the granddaughter to the founder of Lambda Limited, the largest company that develops custom robo parts. Fukashi is found here making a big scene, but Katalia herself decides that we're interested enough and grants us entrance. Since we won the previous tournament, Katalia wants to see us in action by first fighting her security team. These guys clearly don't take their jobs lightly. The first one I fought uses the sniper gun on his robo, a long-range gun that leaves you very vulnerable but the shot travels fast. And the other uses the, he uses the Volt gun. And you get it after beating him as well. The Volt gun was one of my favorites in the GameCube game, having the ability to stun opponents and fire it as fast as you could hit the button. It has one drawback, having the shortest range ever, but its abilities more than made up for it. I wonder if it's as good here. Next tournament, that being the ice tournament. It's called that because the arena you fight in is actually covered in ice and it's about as rough as you'd think it is. The ice physics are strong here, but your opponent is affected just like you are, so if you work your way around it, punishing them shouldn't be a problem. It still didn't stop me from almost losing to Fukashi, nice, but these fights still aren't too bad. There's one thing that's been kinda bothering me since the start of the game and only clicked when fighting against Katalia at the end of the tournament. I don't like the design of the custom robos in this game. It's not even just a graphics thing. Overall, the game looks nice for an N64 game. The character sprites are a bit muddy, but done well enough that I can easily distinguish which characters are important and which aren't. The portrait artwork is done well too, with characters having several portraits to portray emotions, with some being grounded and some being overly cartoonish. But these robos look less like robots and more like the characters that use them. I know that's done on purpose, but I'm just not a fan of their design. The choice of sound effects is strange as well. When you're getting ready to fire out of the cannon, it has this sound effect that reminds me of skeletons. The gunfire and explosions sound fine, but your air dash sounds like a jet plane, and that's rather jarring. Now that I've got that out of the way, we move on to the second half of the Super Commander Tournament, the fire side. These arenas feature a lava hazard where on contact you take damage and are immediately knocked down. Aside from that, it's here where the first instance of an illegal part occurs. Illegal parts are modified versions of existing robo parts that enhance certain attributes at the cost of excess strain on the user and have the skull next to their name in the customization screen. In terms of actual gameplay, there is no reason to not choose a part's illegal version, but you won't get access to these in the story. During your first fight, your opponent, Gosetsu, uses a modified version of the 3-way gun. Not only is it a bit stronger, but when fired, the shots get slight homing properties as well. I actually whiffed this fight, and it turns out that losing has exactly 0 consequences, as it puts you right back before the fight, allowing you to get right back into it. Beating Gosetsu has him chased out by a proctor for his use of illegal parts. He actually notices before the fight, but chooses to let you fight anyway. They claim that since he would have been disqualified for it, you'd advance whether you won or lost, but I have proof that this is a clearly a bold-faced lie. The rest of the tournament goes off without a hitch, and you not only win another trophy, but the privilege to fight Mamoru in an exhibition match. This doesn't end up happening, as right before you fight, his sister collapses for medical reasons and Mamoru understandably rushes her to the hospital. After a couple battles with a weird old man, the gang goes to check on the sister, whose name is Yuri by the way, who is thankfully A-okay. Next is another tournament for a spot in the upcoming World Cup, where we naturally win, securing ourselves a spot. During some training the next day, a child comes running crying that some robo broke his. Seeing as this is rather unusual, you go to investigate and find a robo going berserk, not in a cube, and no one's around to control it. We can't let its rampage continue, so we put a stop to it with our own. What's fun about this fight is since it's taking place in the real world, there is no cannon phase. You just start right up and it's game on. After taking it out, 3 people come to retrieve it. These 3 are members of Dread, an evil organization who wants to use custom robos for evil. They collect and then run off. The gang decide to go talk to Karen's brother, who is a journalist named Akira, who specializes in all things custom robo. They find him at the hospital talking with Mamoru, Yuri, and your mom. Deciding that talking about an evil organization in a public lobby is a bit much, they decide to head back to the lab where we see your mom's assistant, Hamura, rummaging around through some files. Apparently, he also works for Dread and is trying to steal research done by the late Dr. Naruse to try and sell it for military use on the black market. The research in question?
Nanomachine.
You see, Yuri actually has nanomachines in her. At a younger age, she was supposed to die, but was healed by the use of these nanomachines. Fearing that this technology could be used for evil, Dr. Naruse abandoned the project and it was solely used for Yuri, who requires frequent visits to make sure that everything is still functioning correctly. Having nowhere else to go, Hamura runs out into the courtyard where everyone gives chase. He unleashes another autonomous robo, and after we beat it, he retreats using the power of Jetpack. The next day arrives, and Beans finds himself heading down into the seedy underbelly that is Dark Battles. Sounds scary, but it's really just a secret underground fighting ring that's also used as a recruitment center for future Dread commanders. We make our way inside, discover what's going on, and beat a hasty retreat. We're caught right at the entrance, where I think the game glitched out since during the battle, Minamo just stood there and didn't fight back at all. Yeah, That sure was a test of my strength. Finally, we're at the day of the World Cup, but that'll have to wait. Dredd has kidnapped Yuri. Understandably, the tournament isn't so important anymore and everyone heads to Dredd's hideout to perform search and rescue. The hideout's nothing too crazy. You fight your way through a few minions as well as the commanders, including Minimo, who actually chooses to fight this time. Everyone here is stacked with illegal parts as well, making them a pretty significant step up from any fights you've had previously. When you make your way to the end, you face off against the leader, Shinonome. Shinonome locks Yuri into some kind of machine that's not really explained what it does. He spouts some of the typical big bad nonsense, then you fight. The first fight isn't too bad. His robo is quite tanky, but doesn't have a lot of speed, though his modified V-laser gun is pretty tricky to avoid and does a ton of damage. His second fight is a different story. It's the same robo, but he's much more aggressive and his stage makes it harder to get at him since all the obstacles are practically invisible with this cosmic backdrop. I died several times here. After you beat him, Yuri is finally rescued and the police show up to take everyone to jail. As for the tournament, it has been decided that since several of the participants, including the world champion himself, weren't there, that something wasn't right and delayed it to next week, giving you time to rest. We get to the stage and it's more of the same. Fukashi's here because he begged the Lambda president to get a spot. Everyone else goes down without much of an issue. After beating everyone, you move on to the title match against Mamoru. Up until this point, I thought the game's difficulty was well paced even if the story wasn't. But Mamoru is the world champion and he is not afraid to show you why that is. He absolutely wrecked me over and over and over and over and over. This difficulty spike is absolutely insane. Everything is stacked against you. Not only did I keep getting unfavorable starts, but Mamoru's aggressiveness is cranked up to 11. Constant bombs and pods, all of which have huge blast radiuses, come out very fast. His weapon, the Magnum, is perfect for this insanely tiny arena. It doesn't have a huge range, but it's just long enough to be a problem. On top of that, it does insane damage and will instantly knock you down. The recovery from the shot isn't long enough to easily punish, and he's really good at avoiding you if you try to take him on long range. I lost so many times that the game actually started to offer handicaps. These handicaps reduce your opponent's HP by either 25 to 50% depending on how many times you lose. I'm not sure if it goes lower than that, but I continue to lose enough times I think that's the extent of it. Naturally, I never took the handicap. I wanted to conquer Mamoru at his full strength. After what felt like an eternity, here's the fight that finally won. After you win, you're declared the new champion and the game fades to black. This is where the credits would roll, but the fan translation freezes right here for whatever reason. That's all she wrote for the very first game in the Custom Robo series. The game just ends after the story, all that's left is arcade mode. It's just battles, but you can play with a second player if you have them. Unlike the story, you can actually play with different robos and have access to all illegal parts as well. I wish these were just unlocked to use in the story, but at least we get to play around a bit. This is a solid N64 game. It's not too long, I actually managed to finish it in a single sitting. The story's pace is rather quick, but it was an early Nintendo 64 title, so I didn't really expect much. Plus, the actual gameplay is very fun, and the short length of the game makes it so it doesn't overstay its welcome. If anything, I'm actually left wanting just a little more. I'd like to imagine that if we actually got this game in the West, that I would have enjoyed it. I doubt I would have gotten anything out of the story, but I used to play a ton of multiplayer games back then, and I could see the arcade mode getting a lot of use. I sure do miss the days of local multiplayer. A fairly strong start to the series. I didn't really know what to expect from it, seeing it was on the N64, but I was pleasantly surprised. It certainly helped that it was fully translated so I could properly get into the story. The same cannot be said for Custom Robo V2, and as I would come to find out, that is a massive shame. There was a fan translation in the works, but the original people who were working on it abandoned the project and actually destroyed all their assets. I'm not sure why they decided to go scorched earth, but there's no point in lamenting that now. Maybe one day someone will take a crack at it, but for now we just have to work with what we have. At the very least, if you want an idea of what's going on in the story, there's a walkthrough on GameFAQs that actually describes what's going on. As I stated earlier, I don't understand Japanese in the slightest. I tried to follow along with this guide, but it really took me out of it to have to read it, look back at the game, then look back just to get some context. I tried using my phone and Google Translate, but I didn't want to hold up my phone during every piece of dialogue. It's a bummer because from what I gather, the story seems to be a bit more interesting than the first game, and that's all due to my intrigue with this one character who can't properly dive into his robo due to some unknown incident. It adds an air of mystique that the first game didn't have. I can only assume the story is paced about as well as the first game though, since within the first hour you go from getting your first custom robo to entering a tournament. Well, if the story is a no-go, all I can really comment on is gameplay. Structurally, it's exactly the same as the first game. The controls are the same, the objective is the same. However, unlike the first game, you can actually change your robo in the main story. The robos are still butt ugly, but this simple change adds so much depth that the first one didn't, since the robos do play differently. At their core, they all play the same in that you run around and shoot everything until your opponent stops moving. It's how they move around that's different though. You start off with the Ray Mark II, the successor to the one from the first game. The game really wants you to switch it up though, since it gives you your first set of new robos very quickly. Two of them being my favorite types, like the Little Raider, who is incredibly fast and agile but can get knocked down by just being lightly brushed on the shoulder. This game also introduces the Strike Vanisher model, which go invisible during their air dash and act like they're teleporting. These guys are great for getting in close for some quick burst damage, then fleeing the scene before the enemy can even react. There was also this dinosaur robo that ran around on all fours, which was really weird to see, but it was a good different that I enjoyed wholeheartedly. I can only hope one day that this game will get the same love that the first one got, but I won't hold my breath on that. The same can't be said for Custom Robo GX though. Weirdly enough, this game does have a partial translation. The actual dialogue is completely untranslated, but all the parts you need to actually play the game are here. Menus and your robo customization screen are fully translated, which makes it much easier to effectively choose your loadout. Like V2, I can't speak on the story all that much since I still can't read it, but a quick online search does at least let me know it is a sequel. Through the hour or so that I played through it, I recognized one character, Mamoru. I looked it up to confirm my suspicion and also found out that he now works for the police force, which means that at least a few years have passed, but also confirming that it is in the same world and same canon. I can only assume that the story is just as competent as the previous games. I at least know it has the same formula since you start up falling out of bed and then immediately engage in, what else? Tournaments. What I really cared about with this game was the actual gameplay though. Custom Robo Arena on the DS was able to translate the gameplay very well to the handheld, but the GBA was not known for 3D. How well did it handle this? Meh. I went into this with pretty open expectations, but yet I was let down. You've still got the customization. You start the fights from the cannon, though instead of starting from a specific side of your robo, you have a countdown value, which I do drastically prefer. But the gameplay exists in this 2D arena where you kind of awkwardly float around. The previous two games were fast-paced and the fights could be over within a minute. Here, everything is slow. Your shots are slow, your movements are slow, it feels super stiff as well. There are some things I do actually like though. For one, there's a pod that instead of running around and exploding, it acts like a sentry gun and also fires at your opponent. There's also a shot mechanic, which I like because it gives me a bit more control over what parts I get when and within reason. But to actually play the game to experience all that? No thanks. I imagine if it were fully translated, I could play through it once to get the story experience, but I certainly won't be singing its praises like I know I would if V2 were to get a proper translation. It's kind of a bummer to see the trilogy end on a lower note, but thankfully the series knocks it out of the park with the next game. I know the fans are out there, but we are few and far between. At least the series still has some representation in the Smash universe with trophies and sprites. While I don't have super high hopes for official translations of these games, I can at least hope that Nintendo will give this series another shot somewhere down the line. If we can get another Pikmin game after 10 years, or another Metroid Prime game maybe sometime by 2030, then there's a slight chance Nintendo can dig up this series and give it another proper chance. If that does happen, I really hope it's not like F-Zero 99. Damn you, Nintendo, why must you shit?